Hello, welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Climate Change. For us, it's a great pleasure this time to be outdoors rather than indoors like we usually do these lectures. We're in Mumbai, next to a Nala, next to the talking to the celebrated architect P.K. Das, who's been doing a lot of work in Mumbai on cleaning up, well, with citizen participation, doing very different things, I think, cleaning up beaches, nalas, public spaces, parks, with a very different idea of architecture. And PK and I had done this walk through Bombay about 10 years ago, I think, 10 or 12 years ago. So he showed me the wonderful work that he's been doing. So we've been wanting to talk to you ever since. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thank you, Harini. It's such a pleasure to meet you and talk to you. You are such wonderful work that you've done. Your writings are always, we look forward to reading. So thank you. Thank you for organizing this discussion between us. Yeah.
I mean, there's so much to ask you that I think this could be a very long conversation, but maybe we'll start with, where did you grow up?
Oh, well, I grew up in Bhubaneswar.
In Bhubaneswar,
in Odisha. I was born in Cuttack, which is a nearby town. And at that time, my parents lived in Ranchi, where my father was a professor of anthropology.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Huh. And yeah, but my mother came to her parents' house for my delivery. And yeah, but then after that, my father moved to Bhubaneswar. He was invited by the state government to set up the Orissa Tribal Welfare Department. Tribal and Rural Welfare Department. So he set that up actually. So that's how he moved to Bhubaneswar. Maybe I was 2 years old then. And yeah, since then we grew up in Bhubaneswar. My education school has been in Bhubaneswar.
And then when did you come to Bombay?
And my mother was a teacher too. She was head of the Oriya Literature Department. So yeah.
When did you come to Bombay then?
I came here in 72. Soon after school to join the prestigious Sir J.J. College of Architecture. Prestigious then maybe. One of the premier institutes in Asia, in fact. And there were very few colleges of architecture then. And I was very lucky to get admission to that school. I was very excited. My mother actually suggested that I study architecture. And she, because I was interested in arts and science, both. And she figured out the combination of the two is really architecture. So yeah, so she was quite, she guided me to this study. My father died at a very young age. Just at 54, he died of cardiac arrest. And yeah, so that's how it is.
Then you came.
And then I jumped into the city. It's a big city, so I had a huge complex being from a small town, and a middle-class person. A lot of students were rich in J.J. College of Architecture in this big affluent city, city of dreams as we knew. So yeah, I dived in, I studied architecture. I got very soon involved right there from my second year with students' movement in Mumbai. There were a lot of injustices, including corruption in the university, unreasonable fee hike that kept many students out from studying, being able to take admission. There was victimization. There was all kinds of problems in Mumbai with the university and its affiliated colleges. In our J.J. College of Architecture, the students were on strike for nearly 8 years. And the seniors took classes in the lawns of the school when I joined. So that was...
So the strike was ongoing when you joined in?
Ongoing when I joined in. And that was probably a wonderful lead to be introduced to the idea of movements and the idea of collectives as a way to, organize ourselves.
And all central to what you do now.
Yeah, well, yes, I learned a lot from there and quite central to what I'm doing. And yes, we won. The demand was for the college to be taken over by the university, which was earlier a state-run institute with very old faculty, very bureaucratic. They would come with notebooks whose paper would break if folded. I mean, that sort of structure. So finally, the university did take over when I was in my 5th year or the final year of architecture. But coincidentally, that was the year when there was a lot of students' movement in the city against fee hike rise, against corruption, against victimization at the university. And I soon joined the Mumbai students' movement at that
do you
point.
think your father's early work with anthropology or with indigenous communities and the conversations maybe with your mother, did that spark a sense of justice? Or
Undoubtedly. For my father was always concerned about larger issues of justice, particularly, as children, we always in every vacation traveled to distant tribal villages. And those years, I remember there would be no roads, no access, in fact. And we would have his jeep, official jeep, with a long trailer carrying ration, diesel, petrol for 10, 15 days with 2 gunmen, and find our way to these villages. These 4-wheel jeeps. And that was very interesting. And at that point, there was also a very eminent writer, Gyanpith Award winner, very eminent Odia writer called Gopinath Mohanty, who used to write on Adivasis a lot, a very eminent writer. And he used to many times travel with us. And those dialogues, those exchanges, seeing these tribal villages that were completely alienated, not even accessed by any government officials.
So why the guns?
For wildlife, protection, elephants. There would be wildlife for security, basically. Yeah, so these were very rich experiences that left a deep impression on my mind, undoubtedly.
But I'm curious just to follow on that, because since you said JJ's College of Architecture, and I remember even in the 80s when school classmates of mine went there, it was a very elite place. And so architecture generally in India is a very elite profession, in the sense the way especially public architecture is designed is always very landscaped, always, its signals keep out to a lot of people. So your auto driver, your Koli village, your wrestlers, all the people that you showed me, and we went, I'm thinking of the walk we did about 10, 12 years ago on the beachfront. You have designed these spaces in a way that is very minimal, and I'm shifting around a little bit, we'll come back to it. But why do you think architecture does not consider these in the way you consider them? Is it...
Well, I'm not the only person, let me clarify. But yes, architecture, the history of architectural practice, if I may put it, has been very elite. It's been a service-oriented profession. Rich patrons who want to build their dream homes and landmark buildings and so on and so forth, with the whole idea of being exclusive. Exclusivity has been one of the bigger sort of mindset of the clients and the architects, therefore, basically catering to these fancies and desires of clients. And as a result, we have alienated ourselves from understanding of the larger people and the city and the environment and everything else. So we've been kind of straight-jacketed to a limited vision, an idea about buildings as a product that must be packaged well and marketed well. And one that can be marketed well can fetch the highest profit. And so we work towards packaging these products more than understanding that these are spaces that people inhabit and must be popularized and open.
So when you say open, you are talking about minimal architecture. And why is minimal architecture so important?
What's interesting is when we were, for example...
for example, what we're sitting on.
Some broken tiles, some grass which is not uniformly manicured, or not every bit detailed out by an architect. Often what we tend to do is regulate spaces by habit, by our tradition. We tend to specify every inch of the area that we are designing to say, this is where you sit down, this is where you stand up, this is where you walk, this is where you talk. We kind of try and regulate spaces. We set out a kind of a discipline, an order. And that comes from the larger social process through which we have been growing up with, of regimentation, of order, of discipline, closed spaces, therefore, to regulate all of that, to achieve all of that. etc., etc. So
And
the
then
whole
no
movement
weeds.
has been to breaking the order, as I put it. How can we at every point challenge the order with which we've grown up, the order which is forced upon us by the ruling dispensation, by the dominant institutions of finance and development, etc., etc. Yes, so breaking the order is important. And I learned a lot of that when I got down, in the students' movement days. Of course, we were grappling with very significant issues of students' justice.
Right.
But through the course of architecture, my attention went to the slums of Mumbai. And if you're designing housing, we're designing homes, then why not look at the homes in which the majority of people of the city actually inhabit? As you know, Mumbai had in the 70s more than 4 million people at that point, which constituted nearly 60% of the city's population. Right. And so at a young age, I worked with Mr. D.G. Parab in rebuilding a slum, renovating and rebuilding a slum in Bandra with people's participation. So I was exposed to some housing by people ideas, which John F. Turner then in England was doing pioneering work. He had written this book called Housing by People. And that had become like a little Bible for many young students like me to look away from the present order and how participatory planning and housing could really be important to provide social justice.
So where was this? In which slum?
This is called the Jafar Baba slums in the Mount Mary hills of Bandra. And after that, of course, I got then deeply involved with the slums movement in Mumbai. When Nivara Haq Suraksha Samiti was formed, when Shabana Azmi and Anand Patwardhan sat down on a hunger strike against eviction of a particular slum at Nariman Point to clear up that area for beautification. And as you know, in those years, there used to be violent attacks on slums. And massive evictions and displacements would take place. And it was a vicious cycle. People would be evicted, but they would then come back to nearby pavements and spaces to reside. For they also constituted a large part of the economy of the city.
Exactly. They're the ones who are keeping the houses going. And
if you eliminated them, Mumbai would stop functioning. Even the rich would not be able to function. Those rich who don't want them. Don't want slums for that matter.
But they need people to work in their houses.
So these kinds of, I began to be exposed to during these movements of the students and working in the slums to a wide spectrum of professionals or people across what we call our disciplines, which are really segregated from one another. So I interacted with lawyers, I was intermingling with journalists, I was interacting with political activists. So that provided me with these ideas of bringing together everybody and breaking down these barricades that separated us into these silos of practices. So these practices had to be done away with to begin with. So those are very interesting experiences. So when I then got down to, when I finished architecture, studies in JJ College of Architecture, under very difficult circumstances because I was involved with students' movement at that time. I was being victimized in the school for being active in these movements and challenging the faculty then, etc., etc. But somehow I escaped. I finished my studies, got down to working in Mumbai. I worked for about 1 year in a particular office with a salary of 500 rupees. And at that time, I desired to work for Mr. Charles Correa, who had offered me 450. So you can imagine, just for 50 rupees difference, I had to choose the higher one because 50 rupees meant a lot then. And I had no family or, back in Mumbai, though I came from a fairly good middle-class family. But surely I didn't want my parents to then support me in Mumbai. And it was a hard time in terms of, hard time looking back. But at that time, I never thought it was hard. It was a struggle that I sort of naturally took to. It was at times even difficult to have a meal because with 500 rupees, my bus ride would take away 50, 60 rupees. My paying guest accommodation was 250 rupees. So that left with money just for like 1.5 meal a day.
So my father was in Bombay in the late 1950s, and he was studying law, working, sending money home, and his sister was in Thane, so going up and down to Thane.
But that was interesting about Mumbai city.
You could do all of this.
It provided this opportunity of people to struggle and build their lives and be open to ideas.
Yes.
I think that's
that was a thing that Mumbai. That's why it's really a city of India.
Yeah.
And then when did you do your first public space restoration? Because so maybe because people who are listening to this will not know about all the public spaces. So could you just list all the public space revitalization projects?
So what happened was I was then obviously drawn to public interest work by then.
Yeah.
We had long strikes during emergency, etc., etc. It was when Shabana Azmi took over as the president of Maharashtra chapter of INTAC.
Right.
That she approached me as to, PK, what can we do?
Yes.
Yes. So Shabana and I sat down and I suggested why not involve INTAC into the restoration of public spaces.
Right.
And both Shabana and I live in Juhu.
Oh.
And Juhu Beach was really in a mess then, encroached by all kinds of people, not just the poor. It was encroached even by the rich, to a large extent by the rich, by barricading beach areas as their private property, by extending their boundaries.
All the apartments had taken sections
of the beach.
Yes.
And so I started drawing up plans for the restoration of Juhu Beach, and that would go down the authorities as usual.
Yes.
But by then, in my office, we voluntarily started reimagining the waterfronts or the seafronts of Mumbai. Didn't stop at Juhu. Juhu wasn't working, wasn't coming through. And then we jumped into preparing these master plans. So my architects in the office went on a walk tour. They documented large parts of the waterfronts of the western suburbs of Mumbai, from Bandra to Versova. And we prepared these maps. So maps and documentation, mapping cities, really exposed us to a lot of ideas and insights, which I will talk about it later, really formed many deep ideas about understanding of cities through the mapping process. And as I put it, mapping and open data. So anyway, we did that. And we started, we had an approach, either the top-led or the bottom-up approach. The top-led is to take Shabana Azmi and other influential people to the municipal commissioner or to the chief minister and get a nod from them and thrust that plan down to the neighborhoods. But we took a different approach. We started approaching the citizens' committees or certain eminent people in each area. Bandra Bandstand, Carter Road, Juhu Beach, Versova, etc., etc. And we started mobilizing meetings where discussions would happen on these waterfront spaces that were then open to abuse and misuse and a lot of encroachment. And waterfronts in Mumbai have been considered the backyards of the city, tragically. And has been both physically and metaphorically the dumping grounds of the city. Even wastes were being disposed of on the waterfronts. So we did that, and I never put up the plans to any citizens committee then. Because I'd learned then that plans are alienating. Most people don't read plans. You sort of alienate them. I always learned through our slums movement to speak in languages that people could understand. In school, we were taught the other way, of beautiful presentations in corporate rooms and PowerPoint presentations. So it was more like really dialogues with people, and ideas emerged. And these ideas, I would sort of go back to the office and pen them in my plans.
So what kind of ideas?
What kind of space to develop, how can we bring people together? How can we understand the ecology better? The whole wide spectrum of issues. There would also be a lot of demand from a section of these citizens of how we can barricade these spaces to maintain them under the guise of maintenance. And also, obviously, to keep certain sections of the society away from who are not disciplined, who don't know how to behave well. That was a struggle I had, but I achieved, I would say, to convince and really execute these large projects. So the learnings were very interesting of how ideas about open, unbarricaded spaces are important for the city.
So in Bangalore, when we do the lake restoration, the standard challenge always with lake communities is we want it restored, we want biodiversity, we want a walking path, a jogging path, we don't want grazers, we don't want fishers, we don't want fodder collectors, we don't want people from the neighboring slums because they are the ones who ruin the city. And then their sewage and plastic trash will go into some of these lakes.
So very interesting class interest had to be addressed through these movements, through these dialogues. And because that's what dominates the city, the upper class ideas prevail.
But dialogues have made a change? Sustained dialogue.
To a large extent, I would say, at least in the physical manifestation of the development of the waterfronts. At least to that extent. And both Carter Road, Bandstand, Carter Road, Juhu Beach, some of these gardens that you see, many lakes, waterfronts, nallas, have been successful, unbarricaded.
So when you took me, which was the waterfront?
That was Bandra waterfront.
That was Bandra waterfront. Where
Bandstand
you said there were pehelwans in the morning who would do kushti practice.
Yes.
There were the Koliwada, we saw two fishermen.
Yes, there were all kinds of, it's an incredible democratic space.
Anim Ambani went for a walk with his bodyguards behind him. Then college students were,
hanging around there.
Couples were hanging around there.
The slum children would come in the evening and play there. And so it's just a really most wonderful, democratic and open space.
Even for that, I think you told me that you had to fight with the corporate sponsors not to put statues up or something like that. So what was that story?
Well, sponsors often have these ideas about beautification. To put in more sort of popular images by way of sculptures, art pieces, statues of people, all kinds of symbols that relate to the ideas of the elite. Or somebody has seen something in Chicago or California or Las Vegas and they all want it here. But the idea was to make our Bandra, not California in Bandra, So that was a struggle. But interestingly, through these journeys, one kept on grappling with issues of hierarchy, issues of class, issues of beautification, and so forth. And we were determined through these struggles to learn to fight for reclaiming public space in larger public interest, to have open, unbarricaded spaces through the city. But that took me to a larger political idea, which I dwelt upon and have been still dwelling upon. There's never an end to that idea, is the integration of the city. You see, the way we make cities, the prevailing order of making cities is highly discriminatory, highly exclusive. Cities are barricaded, increasingly barricaded. Cities are being fragmented, both in terms of people and places. And one of the emerging trends is the gated communities, as an example. But we do a little garden, we barricade it very quickly. So the idea is to do away with these barricades, de-barricade our cities. How can we network spaces and people who come together into a contiguous structure of social
Which is so hard in a landlocked city. It's got the sea on one side, but it's so congested. There's no place. There are very few public spaces that you can actually restore and revive, right?
Well, that's a myth. It's like saying we don't have money, we are a poor country, or we have too many people. I mean, these things have become actually a bluff. Mumbai, open spaces or public spaces is an idea that can be achieved even in the smallest of spaces if politically addressed in the right way. One of that is unbarricading spaces. So one of the things we developed is networking spaces, very simply. And here's a metaphor of a nalla. The Irla Nala where we're sitting is a wonderful metaphor in that sense. Mumbai is one of the richest ecologically richest cities in the world, if I may put it. We are blessed with 50% of our area as ecological assets.
50%?
50% are natural assets, natural areas in the form of creeks, rivers, mangroves, lakes, forests, hills, and seafronts. Okay. I did a mapping of the city's natural areas and open spaces for the first time, formally, through through honorary effort, through our office, 13, 14 years back, when we had a very big exhibition called Open Mumbai.
Right.
That went on for almost a year in the city, actually. And when we put up this map of the city, it was evident that out of the 480 square kilometers being the city area that we documented, the government sources talked about 452, we found that the developable land area, the buildable land area, is just 242.
The rest is all open.
The rest is natural areas and the open spaces that is reserved in the development plan of the city. So here was an address, a platform to work on and to understand the city in a different way. Our entire expenditure and planning process was focused on 242 and abusing the other 242 or 250 square kilometers. And Mumbai is incredible in terms of the richness, as I said, of these ecological assets.
How would you get political will? Because you have a lot of political support.
Yes, it does. So that's a struggle. That's the struggle.
Right.
How can we turn our vision away from or integrate the two?
Right.
How can planning be nature responsive? How can we turn to these natural areas and integrate them?
Yeah.
And how can people understand them better in their daily life experiences in the city?
Yes.
Because otherwise it's the other side.
Yes.
You know, we barricaded them,
right.
we abused them. Real estate developers constantly landfill the fringes,
yes.
expanding potential real estate development, etc., etc. So there's a big mafia operation that operates in Mumbai. So when we did this mapping, we realized how important this was. We mapped every natural area, set out the boundaries for it. We put up the data for it. What is the area of the mangroves? What are the areas of the creeks, the nallas, etc., etc. Cutting that long story short, we found Mumbai has 300 kilometers of nallas. And then we tracked back to discover or find out, which was a fact but we didn't know and most people don't know, is that these nallas were originally the watercourses of the estuary. And these
like
are
Bangalore's lakes.
Like the Bangalore lakes. And these are the waters from the hills and the Western Ghats that went down to the sea.
So they're not sewage nallas?
They're not sewage nallas. These are the water courses, the natural water courses. And there were 7 rivers that people didn't know in Mumbai. As Mithi River was turned into a nalla. Nobody knew that till the big floods happened in Mumbai. So we found these maps of this incredible city with 300 kilometers of major nallas and another 300 kilometers of minor nallas. And we found that these nallas actually weave across the city and the suburbs. So every part of the neighborhood in the city and the suburbs actually are intermingling with these nallas. So we came up with an idea, it's a wonderful metaphor for that matter, of how we can network the city. Because I was concerned about debarricading, bringing the city together, bringing people and places together, and people and ecology together. Because what had happened in this process of barricading was a process, as I put it, is a process of alienation. We have alienated each other as people. Our relationships have been severed with the idea of the markets preaching self-sufficiency. That we can all be to ourselves in the city. And as we can reach the goods, the markets. All we need is make some fast money and there we are.
Nature can be outside the city. Nature doesn't need to be inside the city. You can go to a park outside.
We go on a holiday.
Yeah, you go on a holiday.
To enjoy the hills. But my backyard must be clean and paved. So all that is a part of the struggle. So we found that if these nallas can be developed, or the reinvigoration of nallas as a project was then initiated by us after the mapping process. And we found, and we put up a simple map for public understanding. This was in Marathi and English, the exhibition. And we said if 300 kilometers of the major nallas on either side were cleared up and had walking and cycling tracks with plants and lights and all that, we would have 600 kilometers of public space evolved in the city.
Linear spaces which can connect the city.
Yes.
And I remember you called it Mumbai on 2 feet.
Mumbai on 2 feet.
Right.
And cycling and walking.
Yeah.
So,
you didn't need to get stuck in traffic. You could enjoy
in fact, you don't depend on motorized transportation as you can walk between neighborhoods and within neighborhoods. So the idea of linear parks came into being. I wrote out a long piece in Nature of Cities on the idea of linear parks, which challenged the idea of central parks.
Yeah, exactly.
Essentially, we were beginning to question the idea of centralization, talking about decentralization, talking about democracy, larger participation and access. So these idea of
self-organized anarchist democracy.
Yes. So we have a big central park, we barricade it, we pretty it, and we regulate access. And we need to plan a journey to that central park. But here are the nallas, and here are the streams, the linear structures that intermingle with every neighborhood. And if they become the idea of a park, the idea of a linear park, then the so-called dumping grounds in the backyards be turned into the proud cultural forecourt of every neighborhood, which this project has well established the idea. We, along this nala, developed these several parks along with lots of plantations of trees, the Kafi Azmi Udyan, the Kishore Kumar Bagh, the Vijay Tendulkar Rang Manch, where we're seated at the moment, the children's park on the other side of the nalla, and we are reinvigorating the nalla spaces, including a bioremedial measure to clean the water of the odor and the mosquitoes and all of that, so people could pleasantly walk and intermingle. So these are wonderful ideas that opens up the idea of people coming together along these spaces and encouraging social interaction of a completely different kind than walking into malls.
Right, absolutely.
And barricaded clubs with exclusive membership fees that nobody can afford. So here is a city that could truly become democratic in structure and open unbarricaded. That's the struggle. That's the struggle. And in that sense, the nallas of Mumbai are a wonderful metaphor to talk about and work upon its reinvigoration.
When did you first start this discussion with Intact, Shabana Azmi in Intact? When was that?
You know, my memory to dates and numbers is very poor.
But approximately.
But this would approximately be 15 to 20 years.
15 to 20 years.
Yes.
And in that time, how many public spaces, how much area of public space have you reinvigorated?
No, by then it was zero.
No, from then to now.
Oh, then to now, large numbers, I would say. As I put it into a chart in my office, we have worked on, with citizens' active participation and voluntary capacity, over 22, 24, 25 public projects in the city. We have developed more than 10 kilometers of the seafront.
Which areas?
Bandra Bandstand, Carter Road, Juhu Beach, Dadar Prabhadevi Beach, and parts of Versova Beach.
And some of these, if I remember, they're not even surveyed land. They're land where trash has been thrown, and it's trash-built land that has been reclaimed by the city by dumping waste, which you then transformed into vibrant lakefronts.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. So reclaiming the seafronts became a movement.
So these 5 large spaces would be how many acres approximately?
Well, you know, these are linear strips. Again, talk about a linear park as an idea. I haven't actually measured their area, but it's there in my Open Mumbai book. All the data is there in my Open Mumbai.
But about 10 kilometers, more, less?
It would be...
I'm just getting an idea. I mean, for people...
More than 10, 15 square kilometers.
And then these nallas
And then these nallas would be, you know, 300 square kilometers. But we've developed at the moment 1.5 kilometers with these parks alongside. So these are large footprints. These would be probably 1.5 kilometer by 0.5 kilometer. So it's about another one kilometer, square kilometer.
And do you feel now people are becoming more open to this?
Yes. After the Bandra movement, where we actually demonstrated on ground the change. And this is what I say, that demonstrating change is vital to the success of our movements.
So it takes time, but then it takes off.
Oh yes, you need patience, tenacity, endurance,
you to be there
all
for the
of
long
that
haul.
to move forward and succeed. And the governments wouldn't give us permission even at Bandra.
I remember.
But we forced through the power of the struggle, the implementation of the project. When we started laying the bricks without permission in the first leg, where Shabana stood and the residents stood, and we did the first pilot over 20 meters, cameras came in, the television moved in, the press came in. There was such a coverage in the city that the authorities actually ran to us to give us the permission. So this was the power of a struggle and of community participation that set out an example in the city. And that inspired, I must say, many movements across the city's neighborhoods.
So what is your vision now for Mumbai under climate change? Where do you get hope from? You were talking about your grandchildren and our books, so many leaves that you want to give them.
Yes.
What is your grandchildren, one grandchild lives in Bombay?
I have my son's daughter who lives in Mumbai, close to my house.
For her
she's
and her
2 years old.
Yeah, so do you think she will grow up into a world of climate change and collapse?
She is already facing the brunt of that.
Right.
For example, difficulty in breathing, cough and cold, asthmatic tendencies, falling sick, all kinds of throat seizures. She's being treated for that time and again. Dripping nose, all kinds of things, burning eyes. So these kinds of discomfort she is facing. And I face too, for the first time in my 52 years of living in Mumbai, about 2 months back, when my throat just stopped, my voice stopped. And I went to the doctors and I had a little cold with it. And they said, there's no medicine. This is all due to air pollution. And without medication, I had to live for about 2 weeks to open up my throat and feel better.
So what is your hope now for the future of Mumbai? Climate change, people, air pollution?
Of course, I'm an optimist.
That's why I asked you. Yes.
And even if we lose more battles than we win, the battle must continue. The struggles must continue. We understand now that it has come to an existential crisis.
Yes.
It's no more a far-fetched idea. And if we do not respond to nature, if we do not adopt nature-led planning, as I'm talking about, then we are not going to exist. The climate change will kill us. And as Kofi Annan's report at the United Nations suggested, there are more people in the world today die due to climate change, being climate victims, than people who died during the COVID period.
Exactly.
And this is a continuous process. COVID was one time, but this is a continuous process. So we have to turn our eyes. We have to re-envision our cities. We have to draw our attention to nature-led planning, which is what we're talking about, how we can integrate nature into the mainstream planning process, where we have to shelve the idea of building more. This build more syndrome that's destroying the cities completely and turning housing into kind of death traps, destroying the ecology and the environment of a city has to be stopped. And some of these examples, studies, research, including writings by you and many, many other people across the world is heartening. That gives us hope.
I think also just the Nala. This is to me my biggest thing of hope. I mean, walking with you, seeing all of these people, you said 10 years ago this didn't exist.
Yeah, nothing existed.
And so many people, we saw joggers, children rolling, people playing, elder people exercising, people talking to each other, grandparents, grandkids.
Yes. But what is interesting also is, connecting the social to physical.
Yes.
And as an architect, I only learned about the physical through my school. And as architects, we do that.
Right.
As I said, we package products. But understanding people with place, with spaces we construct and envision becomes critical. That there is a social dimension that must influence the making of space and habitation, etc., etc. Yeah, so these are struggles, and I'm heartened that, we connected with people like you, many others across the world, a lot of research and studies going on, and that keeps us alive and committed to the movements for a more nature-led planning and development of our cities. So one of the key lessons, if I may conclude with, from nature that we understand is connectedness, interconnectedness, that nothing lives and operates in isolation. The grass will not survive if there is no soil. The trees will not survive, or the soil will not survive if there are no trees. The leaves operate as machines that convert toxic air to oxygen, and the whole entire thing is interconnected and interdependent. As our social structures evolve and as we have built our cities, we've fragmented them, we've separated people and places. How can we reconnect them? How can we rebuild a relationship between people that has been severed into an individualized society idea? Individualization as a dream that's being perpetrated by our governments, and into an integrated, networked, cohesive, harmonious, ecology-centered living.
Beautiful. Here's to hoping all of our cities really turn to this vision.
Yes.
Thank you.
Let's join hands and work together.
Perfect. Thanks.
Super. Thank you. Thank you for coming over, talking to me. And talking to you has been a pleasure always.
Wonderful.
I always look forward to your writings and books. And here I sort of, if I may say, forced you to get me a couple of these books for my grandchildren.
Yes. In a park that you restored with these leaves.
And I'd love to read them.
And
I think the credit doesn't go to me alone, as I keep saying, even though I am marked as an architect who's designed these spaces, as I gave a background in Bandra. These have evolved through participation. Even design ideas come from social dialogues. Right. An architectural brief, as I believe, even in the mainstream practice, comes through dialogues and larger interactions. Large movements, large numbers of people, large associations of people, as in this particular location, the Gulmohar Residents Association, and many other organizations of Juhu citizens, have been responsible to achieving this space, being reclaimed for public space. The same thing about Bandra, Kata Road, Versova, Juhu, Wadala, Kolaba, you name it. The citizens' movements are happening, and that's our hope. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was wonderful talking to you, PK. I think we just scratched the surface on this first conversation. We look forward to having you come and give us a public lecture where you can tell us more about these details. And then to continuing these conversations.